What's up, America? Brace yourselves, because what I'm about to reveal will shock you to your core. Your city, your city, might be on the verge of total collapse. In 2024, 10 major U.S. cities are teetering on the edge of disaster. Economic meltdowns, social chaos, environmental nightmares. It's all coming to a head, and you need to know about it now. Think I'm exaggerating? Just wait until you hear about city number 3. It's been called the next Silicon Valley, but in reality, it's a ticking time bomb. By the end of this video, you'll know which cities are doomed, why they're failing, and most importantly, why you need to get out while you still can. Don't believe me? Stick around. Your future might depend on it. Let's kick off our countdown with number 10, Flint, Michigan. Yeah, you thought the water crisis was bad? It's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. Flint's problems run deeper than its contaminated pipes, and in 2024, it's all coming to a head. Let's break it down. First, the infrastructure. We're not just talking about the water system anymore. Roads are crumbling, bridges are failing, and the city can't afford to fix any of it. The water crisis was a wake-up call, but Flint hit the snooze button, and now it's too late. But it's not just concrete and pipes that are falling apart. Flint's economy is in freefall. The auto industry that once provided thousands of good-paying jobs, it's a shadow of its former self. Unemployment is skyrocketing, and those who can find work are often stuck in low-wage jobs that barely cover the bills. And let's talk about those bills. Flint's tax base is evaporating as people flee the city in droves. It's a vicious cycle. Fewer residents mean less tax revenue, which means worse services, which drives more people away. The brain drain is turning into a full-on exodus. But here's the real kicker. The solutions proposed are like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Sure, there's been some federal aid, some philanthropic efforts, but it's not nearly enough. The scale of Flint's problems requires massive, sustained investment, and in 2024's political and economic climate, that's just not happening. The health impacts of the water crisis will be felt for generations. Lead poisoning has affected thousands of children, potentially impacting their cognitive development and future prospects. And it's not just lead. Other contaminants in the water have been linked to a host of health issues. Add in rising crime rates, a struggling education system, and the looming threat of climate change. Yeah, Flint's going to be dealing with more extreme weather too. And you've got a city that's not just dying, it's circling the drain. Flint, my friends, is a canary in the coal mine for urban America. It's a stark warning of what happens when infrastructure is neglected, when industry abandons a city, and when government fails its citizens. And in 2024, that warning is going unheeded across the nation. Number 9 on our list, Gary, Indiana. Once a booming steel town, Gary's now a ghost of its former self. But in 2024, it's not just a ghost. It's a zombie city, shambling towards total collapse. Let's start with the obvious. Gary's economy is in shambles. The steel industry that built the city, it's gone, leaving behind nothing but rust and broken promises. Unemployment isn't just high, it's stratospheric. Those lucky enough to have jobs are often commuting to Chicago, leaving Gary as little more than a hollowed-out bedroom community. But it's not just jobs that have left Gary, it's people. The city's population has plummeted by more than half since its peak. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned, with more empty houses than occupied ones. It's not just an eyesore. It's a breeding ground for crime and a massive drain on city resources. Speaking of crime, Gary's rates are through the roof. The city consistently ranks as one of the most dangerous in America. Police are overwhelmed and underfunded, leaving residents to fend for themselves in what often feels like a lawless wasteland. But the danger in Gary isn't just from criminals. The environmental damage from years of industrial abuse is creating a health crisis that's about to explode. Contaminated soil, polluted air, and tainted water are a toxic legacy that's poisoning Gary's future. And let's talk about that future, or lack thereof. Gary's education system is failing its young people. Schools are underfunded and underperforming, leaving a generation without the skills they need to compete in the modern economy. It's a cycle of poverty and hopelessness that's almost impossible to break. City services? They're a joke. Roads are crumbling. Sewers are failing. And the city can barely keep the lights on literally. Gary's infrastructure is collapsing, and there's no money to fix it. But here's the real gut punch. There's no cavalry coming to save Gary. The state of Indiana has all but written off the city, and federal aid is a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed. Gary's not just dying, it's been left for dead. In 2024, Gary isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a preview of what's coming for dozens of other American cities. It's a stark reminder of what happens when industry abandons a city, when government fails its people, and when hope runs out. All right, let's move on to number 8. Atlantic City, New Jersey. Remember when AC was the Las Vegas of the East? Well, in 2024, it's more like the Detroit of the shore. This once glittering playground is crashing harder than a gambler on a losing streak. Let's roll the dice and see what's coming up snake eyes for Atlantic City. First up, the casinos, the lifeblood of AC's economy. They're closing left and right, leaving thousands jobless. The ones that are left? They're struggling to stay afloat as online gambling and competing casinos in neighboring states eat into their profits. But it's not just the casinos that are going bust. The entire tourism industry is on life support. The famous boardwalk? It's becoming a boulevard of broken dreams. Hotels are emptying out, restaurants are shuttering, and the crowds that once flocked to AC for sun, sand, and slots? They're going elsewhere. Now, let's talk about Atlantic City's residents. Unemployment is skyrocketing, and those who still have jobs are often stuck in low-wage service industry gigs. Poverty rates are through the roof, and the wealth gap is wider than the Atlantic Ocean. But here's the real shocker. Rising sea levels are quite literally swallowing the city. By 2024, parts of Atlantic City might be underwater, both financially and literally. Climate change isn't some distant threat here. It's a clear and present danger. Storms are getting more intense. Flooding is becoming routine, and the city's infrastructure just can't keep up. Speaking of infrastructure, AC's is crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. Roads are riddled with potholes. Water mains are bursting, and the aging sewer system is one heavy rain away from total failure. And the money to fix it? Sorry, folks, that's been gambled away. Let's not forget about the housing crisis. Foreclosures are rampant, property values are in freefall, and entire neighborhoods are turning into ghost towns. It's a real estate nightmare that's dragging down the whole city. And here's the kicker. Atlantic City's government is a mess. Corruption scandals, political infighting, and a shrinking tax base have left the city unable to address its mounting problems. State takeovers and federal aid packages have failed to turn the tide. Lucky number 7 on our list of urban disasters, Youngstown, Ohio. Once the heart of America's steel industry, Youngstown's now the poster child for the Rust Belt's decline. But in 2024, it's not just declining. It's in a death spiral. Let's start with the economy. The steel mills that once provided thousands of good-paying jobs, they're gone, leaving behind nothing but rust and broken dreams. Unemployment isn't just high, it's endemic. Those lucky enough to have jobs are often working for minimum wage, struggling to make ends meet in a city where opportunity has packed up and left town. But it's not just jobs that have abandoned Youngstown, it's people. The city's population has plummeted by more than 60% since its peak. Entire neighborhoods are hollowed out, with more vacant lots than houses. It's not just an eyesore, it's a breeding ground for crime and a massive drain on city resources. Speaking of crime, Youngstown's rates are off the charts. The city consistently ranks as one of the most dangerous in Ohio, if not the entire country. The police force, understaffed and underfunded, is fighting a losing battle against gangs, drugs, and desperation. And let's talk about those drugs. The opioid crisis has hit Youngstown like a sledgehammer. Addiction rates are skyrocketing, tearing families apart and straining already overwhelmed social services. It's a public health emergency that's spiraling out of control. But the health crisis in Youngstown isn't just about drugs. Years of industrial pollution have left a toxic legacy. Contaminated soil, polluted water, and dirty air are contributing to higher rates of cancer, respiratory diseases, and other health problems. It's a silent killer that's slowly poisoning what's left of the city. Education? It's on life support. Youngstown schools are underfunded, underperforming, and hemorrhaging students. It's a cycle of educational failure that's leaving a generation without the skills they need to compete in the modern economy. Infrastructure? It's crumbling. Roads are potholed messes, water mains are bursting, and the city can barely keep the lights on. Youngstown's physical decay is a visible symbol of its economic collapse. But here's the real gut punch. There's no recovery in sight. The industries that built Youngstown aren't coming back. The city has tried to reinvent itself, but every effort has fallen short. In 2024, Youngstown isn't just struggling, it's in a death spiral. This once proud city is a stark warning of what happens when an economy relies too heavily on a single industry, when government fails to plan for the future, and when hope runs out. Youngstown isn't just dying. It's a glimpse into the future for dozens of other American cities if drastic action isn't taken. Coming in at number 6, we've got Baltimore, Maryland. Think The Wire was just a TV show? Think again. In 2024, Baltimore's real-life crime stats are making that series look like a kid's cartoon. But crime is just the tip of the iceberg in this sinking ship of a city. Let's break it down. First, the violence. Baltimore's murder rate is off the charts, consistently ranking it among the deadliest cities in America. Gang warfare isn't just a headline. It's a daily reality for many residents. The police? They're overwhelmed, underfunded, and caught in a web of corruption scandals that would make a mobster blush. But it's not just the bullets that are killing Baltimore. Poverty is the silent assassin here. The wealth gap in this city is wider than the Inner Harbor, and it's getting worse by the day. Entire neighborhoods are trapped in cycles of generational poverty, with no way out in sight. Speaking of neighborhoods, let's talk about Baltimore's housing crisis. Rows upon rows of abandoned homes are turning into urban prairies. These vacant properties aren't just eyesores. They're breeding grounds for crime, drug use, and disease. And the city can't afford to tear them down, let alone redevelop them. Now, let's dive into Baltimore's infrastructure nightmare. The city's aging systems are falling apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Water mains are bursting daily, sending geysers of water into the streets and leaving residents high and dry. The roads? They're more pothole than pavement. And don't even get me started on the sewers. Raw sewage regularly backs up into homes and businesses. But here's the kicker. Sinkholes are swallowing cars, sidewalks, and even entire buildings. That's right, folks. The very ground beneath Baltimore is caving in, thanks to crumbling underground infrastructure. It's not just a metaphor for the city's collapse. It's a literal danger to life and limb. Let's not forget about education. Baltimore schools are failing a generation of kids. Graduation rates are abysmal. Facilities are crumbling, and teachers are fleeing for greener pastures. It's a perfect storm that's leaving Baltimore's youth unprepared for the challenges of the modern world. And the economy? It's on life support. Once a manufacturing powerhouse, Baltimore has seen its industrial base erode to almost nothing. The jobs that are left are often low-paying service industry gigs that barely keep people above the poverty line. The city's been trying to reinvent itself as a hub for biotech and healthcare, but in 2024, that promise is looking as empty as its abandoned factories. Here's the gut punch. Baltimore can't afford to fix any of this. The city's finances are a mess, with pension obligations and debt payments eating up more and more of the budget each year. And as people and businesses flee, the tax base is shrinking, creating a downward spiral that's picking up speed. In 2024, Baltimore isn't just struggling, it's sinking. This once proud city, with its rich history and beautiful harbor, is becoming a cautionary tale of urban decay. It's a stark reminder of what happens when systemic problems are left to fester for decades. At number 5, brace yourselves for New Orleans, Louisiana. The big easy? More like the big uneasy. Because in 2024, this iconic city is dancing on the edge of disaster. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Or should I say, the hurricane in the Gulf. Climate change is hitting New Orleans like a Category 5 storm, and it's not letting up. Sea levels are rising. The land is sinking, and the city's legendary levees are struggling to hold back the waters. Another Katrina-level disaster? It's not a matter of if, but when. But Mother Nature isn't the only force threatening to drown New Orleans. Corruption is rotting the city from the inside out. It's so endemic that it makes the French Quarter smell like roses in comparison. City contracts, disaster relief funds, even basic services. Nothing safe from the greedy hands of corrupt officials. Now, let's talk about those basic services. They're anything but basic in New Orleans. The city's infrastructure is a hot mess. Streets are flooding with every heavy rain, not because of storm surge, but because the pumping systems are ancient and failing. The power grid? It's about as reliable as a drunk tourist stumbling down Bourbon Street. Speaking of Bourbon Street, let's dive into New Orleans' lifeblood tourism. In 2024, it's drying up faster than a puddle in the Sahara. Crime rates are scaring away visitors. Environmental concerns are making people think twice about visiting, and the city's unique culture is being eroded by gentrification and corporate influence. Sliding into the number 4 spot, we've got Stockton, California. Once known as the foreclosure capital of America, Stockton's problems have only compounded. In 2024, this Central Valley city isn't just struggling. It's on the verge of becoming a modern-day ghost town. Let's start with the economy. Stockton's been hit by a perfect storm of economic disasters. The housing crisis of 2008, it never really ended here. Foreclosures are still rampant, and property values are in a death spiral. But it's not just housing. Stockton's entire economic base is crumbling. Agriculture, once the backbone of the region, is withering on the vine. Drought, climate change, and water rights battles are turning the fertile Central Valley into a dust bowl. Family farms are going bankrupt, and the big agribusinesses that survive are increasingly turning to automation, leaving thousands jobless. But it's not just farm jobs disappearing. Stockton's attempts to diversify its economy have fallen flat. The promised tech boom? It never materialized. Manufacturing? It's fleeing to cheaper locales. What's left are low-wage service jobs that barely keep people above the poverty line. Speaking of poverty, let's talk about Stockton's wealth gap. It's not so much a gap as it is a chasm. The city's experimenting with universal basic income, but in 2024, it's clear that this Band-Aid solution isn't nearly enough to address the systemic issues plaguing the community. Crime is another monster Stockton can't seem to slay. The city consistently ranks as one of the most dangerous in California. Gang violence, drug trafficking, and property crimes are rampant. The police force, underfunded and understaffed, is fighting a losing battle. But it's not just criminals Stockton's residents have to fear. The city's infrastructure is a ticking time bomb. Levees protecting Stockton from flooding are in desperate need of repair. One major storm could turn large swaths of the city into a lake. And climate change is increasing the likelihood of such a storm with each passing year. It's not just the levees either. Stockton's roads are crumbling. Its water system is aging, and its electrical grid is unreliable. Rolling blackouts are becoming the norm, not the exception. And the city? It's broke. There's no money to fix any of this. Let's talk about education. Stockton schools are failing its youth. Graduation rates are abysmal. And those who do graduate often lack the skills needed for higher education or the modern job market. It's a cycle of educational failure that's condemning another generation to poverty. Healthcare? It's a crisis. Stockton's public health system is overwhelmed and underfunded. The opioid epidemic is ravaging communities. Mental health issues are going untreated, and access to basic health care is a luxury many can't afford. Here's the kicker. Stockton's population is shrinking. Those who can leave are doing so, creating a brain drain that's further crippling the city's chances of recovery. The tax base is shrinking, making it even harder for the city to provide basic services or attract new businesses. In 2024, Stockton isn't just a city in trouble. It's a city on the brink of collapse. It's a stark warning of what happens when economic disasters compound, when climate change threatens livelihoods, and when government fails to address systemic issues. At number 3, we're heading back east to Camden, New Jersey. Folks, if you thought Camden hit rock bottom years ago, prepare yourselves. In 2024, this city across the river from Philadelphia isn't just struggling. It's in a death spiral that would make even the most optimistic urban planner lose hope. Let's start with the obvious: crime. Camden has long been known as one of America's most dangerous cities, but in 2024, it's reaching new levels of lawlessness. The police force, despite past attempts at reform, is overwhelmed and underfunded. Gang violence isn't just a problem. It's a way of life in many neighborhoods. But it's not just violent crime. Camden's become a hub for drug trafficking, with the opioid crisis hitting the city like a sledgehammer. Addiction rates are skyrocketing, tearing families apart and straining already overwhelmed social services. It's a public health emergency that's spiraling out of control. Now, let's talk about Camden's economy, or what's left of it. Once an industrial powerhouse, Camden's been hollowed out by decades of deindustrialization. The jobs that built the city, they're long gone, leaving behind abandoned factories and a workforce with obsolete skills. Unemployment isn't just high, it's endemic. Those lucky enough to have jobs are often commuting to Philadelphia or stuck in low-wage service industry gigs that barely keep them above the poverty line. And speaking of poverty, Camden's rates are staggering. Large swaths of the city are trapped in cycles of generational poverty with no way out in sight. But poverty isn't the only thing trapping Camden's residents. The city's housing situation is a nightmare. Abandoned homes at the landscape, many of them unsafe and unsalvageable. Those that are still occupied, they're often in dire need of repair, with absentee landlords neglecting basic maintenance. Let's not forget about education. Camden schools have been under state control for years, but the situation isn't improving. Graduation rates are abysmal, facilities are crumbling, and teachers are fleeing for greener pastures. It's a perfect storm that's leaving Camden's youth unprepared for the challenges of the modern world. Infrastructure? It's a joke. Roads are riddled with potholes. Water mains are bursting, and the aging sewer system is one heavy rain away from total failure. And the money to fix it? Sorry, folks, that well ran dry a long time ago. Here's the real gut punch. Camden's local government is in shambles. Corruption scandals, political infighting, and a shrinking tax base have left the city unable to address its mounting problems. State interventions and federal aid packages have failed to turn the tide. And let's not forget about the environmental issues. Years of industrial pollution have left a toxic legacy. Contaminated soil, polluted water, and dirty air are contributing to higher rates of cancer, respiratory diseases, and other health problems. It's a silent killer that's slowly poisoning what's left of the city. In 2024, Camden isn't just a city in crisis. It's a city on life support. This once proud industrial center is a stark warning of what happens when systemic problems are left to fester for decades, when poverty becomes entrenched, and when hope runs out. Camden's not just dying. It's a glimpse into a dystopian future that could await many American cities if drastic action isn't taken. It's a canary in the coal mine, folks, and that canary isn't just singing, it's screaming for help. All right, folks, we're down to the wire. At number 2 on our list of cities on the brink of collapse, we have Detroit, Michigan. Now, I know what you're thinking. Detroit? Hasn't it already collapsed? Well, my friends, you ain't seen nothing yet. Sure, Detroit's been struggling for decades, but 2024 is the year it all comes crashing down. Let's break it down. First, the auto industry, Detroit's lifeblood, with the shift to electric vehicles and overseas manufacturing. The big three are hanging by a thread. Thousands of jobs are vanishing overnight, leaving entire communities in free fall. But it's not just about cars. Detroit's infrastructure is crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. We're talking about water mains bursting daily, roads that look like the surface of the moon, and a power grid that's about as reliable as a politician's promise. And don't even get me started on the city's finances. Detroit's already been through bankruptcy once, but round two is coming, and it's going to make the first one look like a walk in the park. The city's debt is skyrocketing, and there's no way to pay it off. But here's the real kicker: climate change. Yeah, you heard me right. Detroit is facing a double whammy of extreme heat waves and devastating floods. The city's aging storm sewers can't handle the deluge, and entire neighborhoods are turning into swamps. Add in rampant crime, a failing education system, and a mass exodus of residents, and you've got a recipe for total urban collapse. Detroit isn't just dying, it's on life support, and in 2024, someone's going to pull the plug. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. The number one city on our list of impending urban disasters. Drum roll, please. New York City. Yeah, you heard me right. The Big Apple is about to become the big disaster. Now, I know what you're thinking. New York? No way. But hear me out, because the signs are all there, and they're flashing red. First up, climate change. NYC is a coastal city, and sea levels are rising faster than a Broadway star's career. By 2024, major storms will be turning the subway system into a giant bathtub on a regular basis. And those fancy high-rises along the coast, they're future underwater real estate. But it's not just Mother Nature that's gunning for New York. The city's infrastructure is a ticking time bomb. The subway system is quite literally falling apart. Bridges are crumbling. And don't even get me started on the city's ancient water pipes and electrical grid. Then there's the economy. Sure, Wall Street's still churning out billionaires, but the income gap in NYC is wider than the Grand Canyon. The middle class? It's vanishing faster than a New York minute. Small businesses are shuttering left and right, unable to keep up with astronomical rents and taxes. And let's talk about those taxes. They're sky high and climbing higher, driving out residents and businesses in droves. The city's budget is a mess, with pension costs and debt payments eating up more and more each year. But here's the real shocker. New York's population is dropping like a stone. People are fleeing the insane cost of living, the crime, the crumbling infrastructure. It's a mass exodus that's gaining speed every day. Add in political corruption, a housing crisis of epic proportions, and the looming threat of another terrorist attack, and you've got a perfect storm that's about to hit the city that never sleeps. Folks, New York City isn't just in trouble. It's on the verge of a collapse that'll make the 1970s look like a golden age. The city that was once the symbol of American dreams is about to become a cautionary tale. There you have it, folks. The top 10 cities in the USA that are on the brink of collapse in 2024.